And until then, I will be throwing up a prompt on the MRM YouTube channel Instagram page, as well as just my personal Instagram page, about what the first movie I should review should be. Most probably it will be Deadpool and Wolverine, depending, because that film is coming out in a couple of weeks, so maybe that could be in the first review. Fat chance that's happening. Hey guys, it's Marco here from the MRM channel, back with another video. This video is a follow-up to the channel update video where I will be explaining my new review system that I have developed for reviewing movies on this channel. Before we do get into that, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering about the clip I reacted to at the start of the video. That clip was actually from the first take of this video, but I had shot it months ago, around the same time that I had shot the channel update video. You'll probably notice that my appearance is vastly different compared to the channel update video, and the reason there is such a big gap between those two videos is because of editing problems and all that sort of stuff, but also my schedule just got busy, you know, and I just really couldn't find the time to develop these videos and edit them and all that sort of stuff. But with that all out of the way, as I said, today's video I will be explaining the new review system that I had developed. I had mentioned in past reviews on this channel that I was still kind of tinkering with it, and you're still trying to develop, figure it out. But now I've completely figured it out, so I can't wait to share it with you guys. This video I'll also be linking in future reviews I do on this channel, especially for new viewers and subscribers who come to the channel and maybe are confused by the system I've got in place. So this video will be a great kind of like guide for those people, but even for you guys as well, as this will be the first time you guys are seeing it as well. But with that all said and done, let's get into the new system that I have created for this channel. So this new system, I decided to stray away from the numerical values and, you know, the stars and all that sort of stuff, you know, giving things out of 10, out of 5, because I just felt that wasn't the most accurate way of, you know, assigning a value to the films I watched. Essentially, I just felt that it wasn't very accurate in a sense. You know, sometimes I would give a film an 8 out of 10, but some people would say, oh, you gave this film an 8 out of 10, so you're saying it's on the same level as like this masterpiece, which is a 10 out of 10, you know? I just felt it wasn't too accurate, and I'd have to be really, really specific about it, you know? And keeping that in mind, I think this new system is a lot better. It'll be a lot more accurate for the most part. And so instead of doing numerical values and stars, I decided to do a scale instead. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are probably wondering, what do I mean, a scale? Well, essentially, it'll be like a spectrum of sorts with two movies on each end of the spectrum. Now, as for the two movies, they're meant to represent the quality of the movies I review, with one end of the spectrum being the worst movie I've ever seen, and the other end of the spectrum being the best movie that I've ever seen. And what will happen is, after each review, well, I will be specifying the criteria of both films on each end of the spectrum, explaining why I've put them there. And then at the end of each review, I will then talk about, you know, where the film I'm reviewing will sit on the spectrum. You know, does it meet some of the criteria of the best film I've ever seen? Does it meet some of the criteria of the worst film I've ever seen? You know, does it kind of fit in the middle, bit more negative, bit more positive? You know, that's how the system will work. Now, as for the two films, I guess I should explain why I've picked those two films. And I guess we'll kick off with the worst film I have ever seen. Now, when developing the system, coming up with the best film I've ever seen was not too hard. I mean, for those of you who do know me personally, you'll know that there's only one film that I absolutely love and I will watch forever and ever. It's my favorite film of all time, but we will get to that eventually. As for the worst film I've ever seen, initially I was going to go with this 70s film called The Concorde, Airport 79. And the reason I wanted to put this as the worst film I've ever seen is because, well, it was quite literally the worst film I've ever seen. It was just such a boring film. I remember watching it and just feeling so bored by it, you know, and it was also incredibly goofy, you know, like there were certain scenes in the film that just felt completely unrealistic and it just felt a bit too ridiculous for me. Like at one point in the film, a Concorde which is a type of airplane, it's getting chased around by heat-seeking missiles and all that type of stuff. I don't know, it was just stupid and ridiculous, and, you know, I didn't really find it all that interesting, you know. So that was the film I was going to put on the worst end of the spectrum. Until Madame Web came out. See, when Madame Web came out, instantly this was the film I realized I had to put as the worst movie I've ever seen. Because while The Concorde Airport 79 was a bad film, at least, like, it had some campy moments, and, like, I get it's an old 70s film, so there are some liberties I was able to take with it, but Madam Web, considering it is a modern comic book film, and I use the term comic book film loosely, this film was just a massive misfire on all fronts. For those of you who don't know, Madam Web was directed by S.J. Clarkson and stars Dakota Johnson as Cassandra Webb. It is an adaptation of the Marvel Comics. Madam Web in the comics is sort of like this clairvoyant who's kind of like this multiverse kind of figure in a sense, and Peter Parker / Spider-Man has come into contact with her on multiple times. The difference though is that her appearance in the comics compared to the film is vastly different. In the comics, she's like this old woman who sits on the chair and has like this spider pattern behind her, whereas, well, in the movie she's played by Dakota Johnson, who is definitely not a 60-year-old woman for the most part. But regardless, guess what part of the comics the film takes after or decides to adapt? Absolutely none of it. I mean, besides the fact of the names of the characters and maybe some of the costumes, nothing about Madam Web actually takes from the comics. I mean, for those of you who don't know, Madam Web is set in Sony's Spider-Man-less cinematic universe, which consists of Morbius and the 3 Venom films now, which are the only 3 decent films in this universe. This film, it has references to Spider-Man, for those of you who are wondering. Also, first off, I want to applaud those who haven't seen the film, because, trust me, for me, it was the worst $20 I've ever spent. A friend dragged me along to see it as a joke, and midway I realized this was less of a joke and more of a nuisance. But in terms of actually adapting the Spider-Man lore, any of the characters, literally the only characters that we see related to Spider-Man are Uncle Ben, when he's like a paramedic for some strange reason. I didn't realize he was a paramedic. Don't quote me on that, but for those of you who know Uncle Ben's history really well, do say so in the comment section below about whether he was a paramedic. But also some other characters, like some of the Spider-Women as well. But besides that, oh, and even Mary Parker, who is Peter Parker's mum, who actually gives birth to Peter, and there's even a scene where they're doing baby names for Mary's baby, and I think someone almost says Peter, but they don't. Like, it's... Anyway, she gives birth to Peter, but they don't actually... At no point do they call him Peter Parker. It's just... Anyway, but besides that, the film was a complete misfire for me because the acting was terrible, and actually a joke at times. There was one scene where it was meant to be very kind of, you know, emotional, very tender, and, you know, I actually laughed out loud because of how ridiculous and stupid it was. The dialogue is terrible.
I was in the Amazon with my mom when she was researching spiders right before she died.
You know, Dakota Johnson's dialogue delivery was just... it was just so flat and, you know, uninteresting. Even the villain, Ezekiel Sims, who in the comics isn't really a villain. He's actually somewhat of a uneasy ally with Spider-Man, but his dialogue was terrible. At times, some of the lines spoken by the actor didn't even match what he was saying.
Less than nothing. I will not give up.
Like, people have actually pointed out that the ADR, so, like, I guess the voice work and all that sort of stuff, it didn't actually match what, like, the lip syncing, essentially. It didn't match. It was absolutely bizarre. But yeah, the acting was just terrible and flat. At no point was I really invested in these characters. At no point were the characters doing anything remotely interesting. Honestly, I just wanted all the characters to actually die. Like, all the Spider-Women I didn't really care about, you know, and yeah, they were just bland, uninteresting characters, so I was actually kind of hoping Ezekiel would, like, find them and just end them, because I didn't really care about them all that much. The only thing actually going for this film was Ezekiel's suit that he wears was actually a decent rendition of a Spider-Man-esque costume. But the problem is, it was in the worst film I've ever seen. It was in Madam Web. You know, if this was like a stealth suit for maybe Tom Holland's Spider-Man or something, or Tobey's, or even Andrew's Spider-Man, I would have been like, awesome, yeah, that's a cool suit. But the fact it was used for a nobody villain in a pretty awful movie, it loses points. I'm sorry. Like, it was a cool suit, but it loses points. But regardless, Madam Web was just a misfire on all fronts. And sometimes I wonder whether it was worse or better than Morbius. Right now, I'm sitting on it's worse than Morbius, because at least Morbius, I feel like they were trying to do something. And I do use that term loosely when I say they're trying to do something. But Madam Web, it was just so bland, and it was just boring on all fronts. But regardless, now that we have the negative zone, I guess I should talk about the best movie I have ever seen. So as for the best movie I have ever seen, as I mentioned, this was not a hard decision at all. And for those of you wondering, the best movie I have ever seen is Superman the movie, directed by Richard Donner, released in 1978. The film stars Christopher Reeve as the titular character Superman / Clark Kent, as well as Margot Kidder as Lois Lane and Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor. And this movie is incredible. I fell in love with this movie at a very young age, and since then I have loved this movie. Every new rewatch, I absolutely love this movie. I mean, this is the reverse Madam Web. Everything bad I said about Madam Web, this one is just, it takes everything that was bad and just makes it better. Which is a bit strange considering this came out before Madam Web, so that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But Superman the movie is the godfather of the comic book genre. This was the first sort of blockbuster comic book film. I mean, prior to that we had Batman 66 with Adam West, but really the film felt more like an extended episode, like a higher budget extended episode rather than a proper blockbuster film. Whereas this was proper blockbuster like filmmaking, you know? I mean, they got Marlon Brando, the Godfather, to play Superman's Kryptonian dad, Jor-El, you know? And all those actors that say, oh, I don't want to do comic book films and all that. Just remember, the Godfather did a comic book film. I know, right? Crazy. But besides that, the performances in this are just absolutely incredible. I mean, Christopher Reeve as Superman is just... He is the best Superman. I mean, undisputed, he is the best Superman. The energy he brings to the role is 110%. Like, the way he just interacts with people, the smile he has in his face, the sort of, the optimism, the hope you feel. Like, it really feels like, and I saw this a while ago, maybe in a video or an article, but someone said that his performance in the film actually feels like Superman stepped off the comic book page and appeared in the film. Like, he was just absolutely incredible in that film, and the way he was also able to handle the duality of Clark Kent as well, you know. Something I love about his performance is just how Superman and Clark Kent are two different characters. If you watch the film, it feels like there are two different characters. At times, I actually think he looks completely different between two different shots. I know he's got glasses, different hair, different clothes, but he just looks completely different. I like the fact that as Clark Kent, he plays him as, you know, not being super confident, bumbling, you know, mild-mannered, you know, he kind of, you know, blends in with the crowd. But then as Superman, you know, he's strong, confident, you know, he's got more confidence in his voice and all that. You know, Clark Kent, he doesn't have that. So, you know, his performance in the film is just absolutely incredible. As for the rest of the performances, Margot Kidder is great as Lois Lane. I think she has great chemistry with Chris Reeve, with Clark, you know, and she's like, she actually has, like, she's not always portrayed as like the damsel in distress. She kind of has her own arc, you know, she's feisty, she's fierce, you know, but she's a great character, and I think Margot Kidder did justice to the role. Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor, I think, is also not too bad. He is kind of a bit campy with his supervillain, like, I'm going to destroy the West Coast with missiles and all that, you know, but I think with the gravitas that Gene Hackman has, I think he actually does a pretty good job, and I think he actually has some pretty funny lines of dialogue as well. As I said, Marlon Brando as Jor-El. His performance is the only one that's a bit iffy, but at that point, Marlon Brando was a bit of a lazy actor of sorts. So, like, at one point, he's talking to baby Kal-El before sending him to Earth, and if you actually notice, his eye line isn't actually focused on the baby. He's actually reading a post-note or a page of the script inside the spaceship because he told Richard Donner that at the time, he was just going to do one take and then that was it, you know, so... But anyway, but yeah, this movie, Superman the movie, is the best movie I have ever seen. It is so magical. I mean, Richard Donner, when creating this film, he had the mantra of verisimilitude, which is actually sounds like very similar to, and the reason he had that mantra is because when creating this film, he goes, I don't care how ridiculous or how campy it is, I want it to seem as real as possible. I wanted to make it seem like Superman exists in this universe, but it still feels like Superman, you know? And I definitely think he achieved that with flying colors. It's a shame they fired him on the second film, but I'm glad that in 2006 he was able to release his version of Superman 2. But that's a story for another time. But regardless, this film is just absolutely incredible. The score from John Williams is also incredibly iconic as well. But for me, Superman the movie comes in as the best movie I have ever seen. So, with that all out of the way, that is the explanation of my new review system and the two films on each end of the spectrum, with Madam Web being the worst film I have ever seen and Superman the movie being the best movie I've ever seen. And yes, I do understand that on both ends of the spectrum, they are both comic book films, which goes to show that my media library is very limited. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope that it does clear some things up. Come future videos and reviews and all that sort of stuff, this will be the system I am using. And for those of you who are new to the channel and all that sort of stuff, you know, whether it be in future reviews and all that type of stuff, this video will be linked below as a way to better explain why I have that system in place for the reviews. But as always, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel as well. Leave your thoughts on whether the review system is a bit complicated or it's a bit too simple, or if you think this is absolutely perfect. But until then, look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. And as always, keep watching movies.